Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, The Edge Computing Landscape in the Semiconductor Industry in Europe. Such a long title, by the way. With Luis Fernandez, Senior Research Manager at International Data Corporation, and Alexandra Rotaru, Data and Analytics Manager at IDC. My name is Davide Moschella from Trust IT, and as already happened last week, I'll be supporting the session from a technical standpoint. So if you experience or if you encounter any technical issues, any technical problems, and also if you have any question for our speakers, feel free to write in the chat. Now I would like to hand it over to our moderator, Luis Fernandez. So thanks, Luis.
Okay, thank you so much, David. Welcome everyone who could attend. We're very pleased that you were able to attend. I know it's close to the holiday season, so a lot of people are on vacation already, have already took the time to be with their loved ones. So we do appreciate the time you're giving us. Today we'll be speaking about edge computing landscape in the space of the European Union. And joining me today will be Alexandra Rotaru. Alexandra is a colleague of mine from IDC, and she specializes in edge computing. She is the senior official responsible for doing a product that we have that is the Edge Spending Guide. So she looks at the worldwide spending for edge. Obviously, today we'll be focusing more on the EU, but we will have some questions for her on how the EU stacks up to other traditional markets to see how the EU is doing. So that's to do a comparative analysis with the rest of the market. But she does the whole of the edge spending. So I'll start off with a few slides from data from research that we have from IDC. The first part I'm going to focus, it's inevitable to talk a little bit about how AI and GenAI has made gigantic shifts in the infrastructure market as a whole. And obviously, that has had an impact on other areas, but also on edge. Second of all, we will talk about how the edge behaves in the EU space. So what is happening with edge in the EU? What are some of the key points of edge in the EU? And then finally, we'll talk about some of the impact that poses to the semiconductor industry. So obviously, edge will require the semiconductor industry to be lively and to acknowledge the importance of edge for the infrastructure side of things. But we'll see how that impact is showing up and how will show up in the future as well. We'll do a little bit of a forecast. Then we'll ask some questions to Alexandra. We do have some prepared questions for her. However, we wish that those questions are just enticing or just a bit of a teaser for you to actually follow up with your own questions or give us your own thoughts or points on what either I'm saying in the presentation or what Alexandra says in the interview. So feel free, like David said, to just put in the chat some of the questions you might have regarding these topics, and we'll try to get to them either in the interview or in the time that we left at the end for Q&A. So do feel free to ask away. Okay. I'll leave this up. Actually, I'll leave this up just for a little second. I believe David mentioned already, but this presentation is being recorded, and then it will be publicly available. So you'll have time to read this in excruciating detail. But I just wanted to leave it out there, the executive summary of some of the slides that I'll be presenting, and then we can discuss it at the end. So starting off with the impact of Gen AI. So I don't need to tell you, we all know how AI has been very disruptive in the market. However, we wanted to look at what has been that disruption in companies, in companies in general. So this survey that we did was a survey that we conducted with around 1,000 companies, but this was EMEA based, so Europe, Middle East, and Africa. However, in the space of the EU, so in companies based in the EU, we have, of those 1,000, we had 700 respondents. And what they told us is that around a quarter of the companies, now these are very distinct companies. They go from small companies, 50 employees, something like that, all the way up to thousands of employees. And these are various industries, so all walks of life, so to speak. So about a quarter of them, of the European Union companies, were telling us that there is no disruption from Gen AI. Now, this is at the time of the survey. The survey was conducted this year, mid-year more or less, but around a fourth of them had not experienced any disruption yet by generative AI. Obviously, there's a significant disruption by some companies, so 8% of them. Others, the biggest chunk, have seen a moderate impact or a moderate disruption, and then about more or less a third have experienced no disruption at all. Um, as for the biggest impacts, we wanted to focus specifically not just impacts in general, but we wanted to specifically look at impacts on business revenue and or profitability. And most of the biggest impacts have actually been, you can see that it's companies using Gen AI in some way to be able to produce more, to be more capable, to develop new skills, to develop new business, etc. So we can see here that companies are using as productivity tools for their employees, helping them deliver better quality services, or very specifically in companies that are actually developing source code, they're using AI, Gen AI to help with that development of source code. Obviously, then comes increasing security and compliance. This is something that we see across the board out of every survey. Typically, it's a, a very important issue for all companies is obviously security and privacy and compliance. Now, what we wanted to look at here, this is a point of data that we usually do in all of our surveys, which is we look at revenue and budget. So we look at, okay, how from the last financial exercise that you did you grow your revenue or did you reduce your revenue? Are you increasing the budget for next year in terms of IT, or are you declining that amount of budget? And then we actually compare that to the responses of what do you think is the importance of Gen AI compared it to the revenue and the budget. So as you can see, they're very much aligned. So these are actually three questions of the survey, but we stack them side by side, and you can see that they're very aligned. So more or less the same amount of companies that are growing their revenue and growing at a specific rate are the ones that are increasing the budget for AI and are the ones that are giving more importance to Gen AI. So there's I wouldn't say causality because that would be a gross error to go that far. But there is definitely a correlation between the revenue that the company can then invest in budget for IT, and some of that budget for IT is going to be invested in some sort of Gen AI project or initiative. So they basically correlate at the same value. Then an important aspect, because we had been talking to customers for the past 2 to 3 years, and one thing that we were very concerned was that when the AI and Gen AI, basically when ChatGPT showed up in the scene, nobody was quite ready in terms of budgeting specifically for AI projects, right? So we started looking at customers, and customers were telling us something very worrying, and maybe that resonates with some of you listening today, is that a lot of the budget for AI projects was being cannibalized from other areas. Now, we understood that would happen because when ChatGPT came into the scene, nobody was prepared. So obviously, people didn't have, or companies didn't have a budget, or most of them didn't have a budget allocated to specifically to AI initiatives. However, we did say at the time, look, this is interesting, but this is not in any way, shape, or form very sustainable. Because if you're cutting away from other projects, that means that those other projects are going to need that budget sooner or later. So that budget actually has to come from somewhere else. Um, so what we're seeing here, and this note is very important. Please note that these percentages do not stack up, because the original question had actually a choice of three, because we know this isn't black and white. So we know that some projects, or the budget is coming from one place, but other project is coming from other places. So actually the respondents could have more than one answer. That's why if you sum these percentages, obviously they're going to give you a value greater than 100%. However, it's interesting that we're getting a big fraction of customers actually now saying, okay, this is, we're using the budget from other AI projects, or we're using the budget from lines of businesses. So that means that someone else is paying for those projects, which in our opinion is actually the way to go. If you're doing a disruptive project that is going to help with the productivity of department X, it makes perfect sense for the investment for that initiative to come from that department X, because they're the ones that are going to benefit from that percentage. However, we still see there's a big chunk of the market that is still robbing away the budget from other areas, and we think that that will have a tendency to shrink over the years, because again, it's not sustainable. However, we do see it still, and it's going to be problematic, and it's something that we need to look very carefully. Um, Here's the actually the list of countries that we interviewed in terms of EU. So this does not correspond in any way, shape, or form to the whole market. It is for, we did interview some of the biggest players in the EU, but obviously it doesn't have all 27 member states. However, it is important to see. You can see that it's sorted by the extensive use of Gen AI. We do see that there's a bit of a big difference between the biggest users and the lesser users. So you can see there's a big variation between the countries. Um, and you can have this for your later viewing at more detail. So you'll have this in the recording to see in more detail. Please note that in the case of the Nordics that you can see here, those include those include, obviously they don't include Norway because they're not a EU member, but those include Denmark, Finland, and Sweden. So that's what that stands for. Okay. We did look at now going into specifically Edge. We did look at what are the major considerations when choosing your model and deployment types of Gen AI. And what companies are actually telling us is that edge is not a top priority. To be fair, it's the lesser priority of all the priorities that we listed in the survey for people to answer. The deployment at the edge is not definitely a priority for EU companies at this moment in time. That doesn't mean that won't change in the near future, but this is the results we're having right now. Obviously, accuracy is very important, and compliance is the most important. The regulatory compliance side of it is the major consideration when choosing. Okay, so going into Edge in the EU, this is a bit of a broader question. This is actually from another survey that we did. This is a survey about the digital infrastructure sentiment. It's a much bigger survey, but in this case, it had around 1,500 respondents, and around 1,000 of them, a bit over 1,000 of them, were EU companies. And I wanted to actually compare with the EMEA results, so the overall results for you to see. As you can see, edge is not a priority. Again, it's not a priority for the EU. However, it's not that different from the rest of our EMEA friends. So when I say EMEA friends, so this includes the UK, for instance, Middle Eastern countries, some African countries, some Central European countries that are not part of the EU. Um, but just to tell you that we're not very focused. So we as EU are not very focused on edge, but let's face it, the rest of EMEA isn't as well. Okay, again, comparing the two, this is actually on the left, we have the the amount of infrastructure spending that is allocated to edge, and then the amount of spending that is expected for next year. Okay. So as you can see, slightly lower in the EU than in EMEA, and it's actually growing a little faster in EMEA than in the EU. As you can see on the right, aside from starting from behind on the left, the EU is actually investing less in edge than the rest of EMEA. Okay. So again, this is a comparison between EMEA and EU, and we're looking at the extensive use of those edge workloads. So we asked the companies that actually said, yes, we're using edge. So we excluded from this the ones that said they had no plans, they weren't using. And so we asked which workloads were they planning to use. Obviously, again, security is very important. So that has the biggest results. So automated threat intelligence monitoring and prevention, which is using using Edge to prevent attacks, security attacks. And then we have a big focus on automation and optimization. So both from a manufacturing process, so companies that actually do manufacturing, but also from a business process. So tertiary companies, services are actually using it as a business process as well. So that's interesting. So then we looked at this slide actually represents the hardware platforms that we're using for those workloads. So exactly the same list of workloads as you can see here. The question is, are we using a dedicated platform or a shared platform? Okay, so do we use a platform that is disconnected from everything else? Or can we use a shared platform that can do this and a lot more things? So as you can see here, the list varies a little bit depending on how it's being done. So again, in this particular case, these tabs on the left and the right, they don't sum up to 100% because they sum up to the amounts of respondents that are actually using these workloads. So the remainder until 100% is I'm not using either a shared or a dedicated platform. But just wanted to highlight that point. But as you can see, there are interesting points. So, for example, fraud analysis is something that is um, quite used in shared platforms. But for example, in terms of visual inspection for integrity, also quite shared. But for example, things like business processes where you have to work with confidential information, there's a focus on dedicated platforms. Okay, so benefits of deploying edge. A lot of companies are deploying edge because of costs, whether it's to reduce IT infrastructure or to have better control. And then come the usual suspects of security and compliance. And then there's a question of productivity and performance and the agility to provide new services. But I would like to focus specifically on the cost issue when looking at where to deploy a specific workload or a specific initiative. A lot of the times, Edge is being selected because it actually has a better cost than doing it in a core data center for whatever reason. Maybe it's related to communications and latencies, missed opportunities. Maybe it's related to simple costs of distances. But the important part is cost has a big impact there. So now talking about the last topic of the presentation, which is what are we doing in terms of semiconductor industry to help the edge infrastructure. So the EU has been funding and has been fueling a lot of big projects. So we have two examples here. This is not an extensive list. There's a very big extensive list of projects that the EU is providing support to, either financially or technical or otherwise. And this, for example, is not an extensive list because, for example, you can see here that there's a few missing, but at the time we did this slide initially, these were some of the main projects that we're working on that the EU was sponsoring in terms of AI, the AI factories and the technology centers. Again, not exhaustive list, but these are some of the projects. So the EU is betting on a lot of projects in the EU space. However, when you look at edge, there's actually a very interesting point, which is edge is very specific in the sense that edge not always has the issues or not always has the ability to circumvent the issues that are now plaguing core data centers. So this is a problem that is starting to show up in a lot of data centers, and we've seen this across Europe where power consumption and cooling capacity has been a major issue for some of the biggest clusters and the biggest data centers in Europe. Well, around the world, but we're focused in Europe right now. The problem is, as we're going to shift these AI workloads to the edge, which is happening, we see the data trending in that direction. The AI workloads will move closer to the edge. We're going to have an issue at the edge because if you think it's hard enough to give power and cooling to a big data center localized in a specially built place very near to power sources, et cetera, it's going to be even harder to be able to, granted, not at the same scale, but it will be very hard to provide the energy required at edge locations, which by definition probably won't be as well located in terms of power sourcing and cooling capacity. So there is an issue here that we need to take note, and the edge is definitely going to have that problem. Some vendors, I'm using this one purely as an academic example. I don't want you to, this is not in any way, shape, or form an endorsement or publicity to a specific vendor, but some vendors have started to work on trying to develop solutions for this problem. So they're heavy on building edge solutions, edge infrastructure platforms that are not as power consuming and cooling consuming as some of the AI factories or rack sized solutions that actually require a lot of power and a lot of cooling. So here we have an example of a system that actually integrates computing, storage, obviously software, and networking and security in a single platform, a very small platform. And on top of that, it actually allows for acceleration. So it actually allows for some of those Gen AI workloads that are being deployed and will be deployed at the edge very soon. Now, the problem is the problem is we're having some issues here, and this is actually not a new problem. This is something that keeps repeating. This happened before when we started using SSDs instead of mechanical disks, where we needed additional silicone to build the disks. So memories actually started rising prices. There was a price surge in terms of memories. Now the problem is, as we're using shared components for GPUs and for CPUs, and those GPUs actually require a very big need. They have a very big need for memories. Again, the types of memories that are used in GPUs are actually surging in terms of prices, and the supply chain is not being able to cope with that issue, with that necessity in terms of AI. So what is our take, IDC's take on where there needs to be investment? Now, understand this is not specifically an investment fully talking about money. This is not, we don't expect the EU to just dump money into a problem and expect it to be solved. However, these are the biggest main issues that we see that are missing to be able to um, develop the edge consistently. So it's around skills. There's a big lack of skills in today's Europe, obviously in other places as well. But interestingly enough, there's a skill shortage in the EU, so that's something that needs to be invested. There needs to be an investment in terms of power and cooling. So sourcing renewable sources, what to do with the power actually coming out of a data center. For example, the heating, reuse that heating for other purposes. There's a lot that can be done, and these obviously are interconnected with the skills as well. And also ASICs and memory. So there's a big talk nowadays how the EU has an issue where we are not part of the supply chain in terms of high-end semiconductors. So except for a small bit in terms of the ultraviolets, a lot of the high-end semiconductors are designed in the US and then they're manufactured in Taiwan, so it ends up being outside of our scope. However, the edge is very interesting because a lot of the times the edge uses general purpose, not high level ASICs or semiconductors, generic purpose semiconductors. So those actually we can invest and we can develop fairly easily and fairly rapidly without needing decades to implement. And also, we also think that the use of memories is actually something interesting, which is the memories are going to be needed. So if we were to invest in memory design and memory manufacturing, we would become codependent with other markets that we depend on for other components. So that could be an interesting approach instead of, okay, let's do what everyone else is doing. Okay, let's do something that everyone else needs and don't have right now. And obviously, I'm not saying that it's easy or not time intensive, but it's also a way to go. It's an alternative and it could be actually easier than reinventing the wheel, so to speak. Um, so that's my last slide. I wanted to pass now to Alexandra because I've been talking a lot about this data, about the surveys that we did. We do a lot of surveys annually, and we do collect a lot of data worldwide, not just EU or not just EMEA, but then someone has to analyze that data and actually compile and look at how this stacks up in terms of worldwide. And this is where Alexandra steps in. So she's a data analyst. She looks at that data and she has to build these hugely complex mathematical models where she will look at the amount of spend that we see in individual countries and individual regions and say, okay, this is our estimate, not only for this year or for the past year of what happened, but we actually project, well, not me, Alexandra and the team actually project what is coming down the pike for the next years to come. So she actually forecasts what is to come. So she's a valuable asset to help us here to understand where the market is going and the different markets are going. So, Alexandra, I don't think I've said anything incorrect, but please
No.
feel free to correct me anytime.
Yeah, of
Um,
course, of course, of course.
and I want to start with, like I said, we have a few planned questions for you, but obviously people are free to engage, and we're happy for them to engage and ask questions in the chat in the Q&A. I don't have the view of the Q&A right now, but maybe David can, at the end of these four questions, David can tell us how we're doing and if we have any questions from the audience. But
Of
now I would
course,
like
of course.
to thank you, David. I would like to ask the first question. We did look at some of the trends around edge spending, so rise and decline in terms of budget and in terms of revenue of companies, etc. However, we were specifically looking at the EU, and we were looking at a microcosmos of those companies. Alexandra, can you elaborate a little bit on that, how we're seeing the edge spending in the EU and in worldwide or specific regions? How does that stack up? How does that all look?
Yeah, of course. First of all, hello, Luis, and hello, everyone. So, Luis, you mentioned in one of the previous slides that edge is maybe not a top priority, at least yet, but it's clearly on the road of becoming a core pillar of digital infrastructure, again, at least at global level. And it continues to complement the cloud, of course, and enabling distributed workloads, not only for AI, but also for IoT, robotics, even augmented reality and virtual reality, and so on. So, you mentioned us crunching the data, of course. So, we estimate the global edge spending will grow steadily at double-digit rates. So, we are estimating that this will reach more than $400 billion, of course, by 2029. And this, of course, includes the investments coming from enterprises directly. So basically, different organizations from different industries buying edge infrastructure to build their own infrastructure or their own edge environment. But also from service providers buying edge infrastructure to offer as a service to those enterprises. Actually, this service provider segment, this service provider investment area is the fastest growing one at global level and of course in some of the regions. This growth is driven by exactly some of the enterprises priorities you mentioned before. For example, such as the need for real-time analytics, AI inferencing at the edge, improve automation, increased agility and flexibility, of course, enhanced customer experience, that's very important, most important, cost reductions, and enhancing resilience of the whole operations. In terms of regional spending distribution, I would say that America, in the global region, America, we include the US, Canada, and Latin America. And all these three lead with about half of the total spending. And I mentioned before the service provider investments and that this is a very fast growth area. And this is heavily related to America's development of edge because of hyperscalers that invest a lot on infrastructure to support edge and large-scale AI workloads. Also, US has widespread 5G adoption, which helps enable edge and edge AI use cases like real-time decision-making, low latency processing, and others. And also, US play a dominant role in chip manufacturing, which is very important, especially for AI workloads. And also, the last one, I would say that US, the whole US regulatory environment tends to be more flexible or more favorable for a more aggressive tech investment compared to some other regions. However, besides America, other regions are showing significant evolution. For example, Asia Pacific, and here we include also China and Japan, are the second largest region in terms of edge computing spending. And the evolution is driven by smart manufacturing and telco-led edge deployments in China, for example, in Japan, in South Korea, and also they have some massive government-driven, government-led AI and edge computing initiatives, and that's very important. Same in Middle East and Africa, with some increased investments in AI and cloud infrastructure to support enterprises' infrastructure and innovation needs. But Mia, you described a bit how the Mia situation looks like. So basically, you see that a global perspective looks very good, but there are different paces of adoption or growth depending on the region. And here we include also Europe. Thank you. You are on mute, Luis.
We talked about this in so just fair notice. I did talk about this before we started, that someone was going to be on mute and I'm speaking, so it was me. It's always me. So that was actually an interesting point. So we looked at, so 2029, it's going to be a market worth 400 billion.
Yeah.
And the Americas actually have 50%, and the second biggest group is APAC. Now, I was wondering, in terms of the EU, what are some of the biggest gaps? So you mentioned that in the Americas, it's hyperscalers and 5G. In the APAC, it's smart manufacturing and telcos, and some government AI initiatives. We know that different regions have different ways of working, but where do you see the biggest gaps? Is it in those government AI initiatives? Is it in the telcos? Is it in, well, hyperscalers we don't have at the scale of the US ones, so where do you see the biggest gaps? Where do you see
Mhm.
which ones will?
Thank you. I didn't mention the Europe perspective in the previous question, and that was intentional. But let me tell you that Europe accounts for approximately 20% of the global spending, and basically this is an estimated spending of more than 60 billion in 2026, so next year. And of course, same as the global evolution is growing at a strong double-digit CAGR through 2030. And we see that this is a healthy growth still, but it lags a bit behind North America and APAC in, let's say, in ecosystem maturity, but also in absolute scale. And I will take it one by one, and I will try to mention the biggest gaps that I see. So first, on the scale. So European deployments of edge, I would say that are often fragmented and slower compared to the US hyperscalers or Asian telcos that I mentioned before. Second, the hardware and infrastructure. As you know, Europe relies heavily on external semiconductor suppliers, and this limits a bit the ability to scale edge AI hardware quickly or more quickly than other regions. Third, I would say integration. So while Europe has some successful deployments and excels in industrial IoT, energy, healthcare, even automotive, it lags in embedding the Gen AI inferencing at the edge. And you know that you also mentioned that in the results from the survey. And this is partly due to the limited access to high performance accelerators. And finally, again, this was shown on your last slide, talent and skills. There is a shortage of AI and semiconductor engineering skills, which slows a bit the innovation, again, compared to other regions. But Europe might be behind America, but it's ahead of many other regions, and the perspective looks good still. You already mentioned some of our surveys showing the significant impact Edge could have on the European companies, from security and data protection benefits, process automation, improved customer experience, cutting costs, improving performance, and so on. I think this will contribute to increased adoption in the coming years. And industries such as retail, utilities, healthcare, automotive, travel and transportation, or even telecommunication are already investing heavily in edge in Europe to accomplish those benefits. And I think beyond those benefits, one key reason for increased adoption and or estimated increased adoption in the coming years is that European companies are starting to understand they need to build a foundation for AI in order to scale. And in this case, edge infrastructure is the backbone, the foundation for deploying AI models where they matter most for companies. So near the customer, near the device, and of course near the where the decision point is. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, so in terms of these gaps, and I noticed that you, in the first question, you actually brought it up or mentioned it briefly. We have the legislation obviously has an impact. We know that there's issues with having a stifling innovation by too much regulation. But what are some of the points that are impacting the EU's ability to be competitive?
Well, I would say that given those gaps, Europe is actively working to increase its competitiveness, leveraging some of the unique advantages. So, some of them I already mentioned before. Europe's industrial strength in manufacturing, healthcare, aerospace, automotive, and energy sectors combined sustainability goals and the EU policy initiatives makes it a key market for edge AI deployments. So many vendors are already supporting the environment to build massive compute infrastructure. You already showed the map with different countries building infrastructure. And they are planning to build also AI factories across Europe, including gigafactory scale operation and establishing AI technology centers in different countries such as Germany, UK, France, Italy, Spain, Sweden, and Finland, and many others to accelerate the research and workforce upskilling into the region. I would say that I mentioned these countries, and I would say that Western European, we include all these countries in Western Europe, ranks moderate to high in AI readiness. So, how prepared are those countries to leverage AI for business transformation, for innovation, and yeah, performance? And this is seen especially on the policy and regulation side, and this is visible in increased adoption rates across key industries, as I mentioned before. Um, of course, on the infrastructure side, adoption is still limited, but there are initiatives on the way to increase adoption. Because of, for example, on the semiconductor side, Europe currently holds a small share of global production compared to Asia or the US, of course, but aims to increase by 2030 under the EU Chips Act. And some major policy shifts will help to accelerate all these initiatives. So the plan now is for Europe to expand from a consumer of AI to a creator of AI and edge AI related technologies. So in this way, I think Europe will maintain its position as a leader in industrial sectors, will be less vulnerable to, for example, geopolitical shocks, to different macroeconomical impacts, and will increasingly pursue opportunities in emerging markets like, for example, autonomous systems and energy optimization. Basically, areas where edge and Gen AI convergence is key, of course. Thank you.
And one last point, you did touch on that in terms of what can be done differently, obviously the manufacturing side, but I was keen on listening to your opinion on this last point that you just mentioned, which is these, let's call them underserved technologies, if it's fair to say that. What can we do differently? So from either from a government perspective or an industry perspective, what should we be doing to influence that for that industrialization? What can we do differently?
So I think that Europe needs, let's say, a coordinated approach on multiple levels. And I recognize, and this is something that you also shown in the survey results. I recognize that there is a strong foundation to build on with all the advantages both you and me mentioned before. So I think that's a good thing. I would say that, sorry, first, we need to accelerate the semiconductor autonomy. So, even faster execution on the EU Chips Act and increase investment in advanced manufacturing and AI accelerators optimized for the edge inference. This will stimulate also other industries outside manufacturing to expand their investment in infrastructure. Second, I would harmonize the standards and foster or support partnership to scale infrastructure for edge AI workloads. We need for sure to increase collaboration among different players that have different capabilities in order to build a common understanding, a common solution, or common, technology stack, focusing on the benefits and how these edge benefits can improve European companies and also consumers' lives. Third, we should improve investing in talent and focus on market education. So, expanding the AI testing facilities in Europe and creating some incentives for startups, for example, focusing on edge native GenAI applications. I think that's very important. I think also that's a significant challenge that companies are still struggling to understand the impact of edge, the overarching benefit, let's say, or how the AI looks on longer term and how their day-to-day life and operations, of course, will be improved. And finally, I would leverage all the mentioned above advantages like strong industrial base, sustainability, strong autonomy and resilience, AI readiness and openness, and so on, as a differentiator and continue to build on that. So I think that concluding, if Europe aligns these strategies, it can turn current gaps, let's say, into competitive advantages and lead in industrial AI and secure digital infrastructure now and in the future, of course. Thank you. Thank you, Liz.
So if I let me just try and summarize and wrap up this last question. So basically, you mentioned the three pillars. So the let's call it the semiconductor autonomy,
Yeah.
the harmonization of standards, and the focus on talent. And if we were to combine these three, if we have these, let's call them pillars to build our house upon, this will actually be a differentiator, because when we look at other markets, if I understood correctly, other markets might have some of these things, but they don't have the others. So that means that if we can create this greatness of three, then we can actually build upon that, and we can actually be a differentiator and actually be top of the spear in terms of development and innovation. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think these three, let's say, key pillars are the minimum that we need to improve now to start building that foundation that I've been talking about. So we should start with this. Semiconductor is the foundation for edge, for AI. Partnerships, of course, and collaboration among different players and skills. The skills are very important because without skills, you cannot implement these benefits into the company's lives, for sure.
Okay. Thank you so much, Alexandra.
Of course, thank you.
We've finished the part about the presentation and the interview. I don't have any more questions for Alexandra. However, we would like to open up for Q&A if the audience would like to ask any questions. Feel free. In the meantime, while we wait, if I understand correctly, David, I don't think there's any questions at this time.
Not for now, but
Okay.
guys, if
Feel
you have
free.
any questions for our speakers, feel free.
We still have a few minutes before the end of our session. And I would like to leave you here with these key takeaways. Again, David is recording the session. This will be publicly available soon on the website. There will be most certainly a link to this video, so you can watch it on repeat and then pause in specific slides so you can take notes. But actually, some of the things that we've been talking about are summarized, let's say, in this particular slide. I wanted to give a bit of closing time for our audience if they're actually typing a question or something. But I wouldn't want us to keep everyone in suspense. Um, maybe I don't know, Alexandra, from your side, are there any don't feel obligated, but are there any closing remarks or questions for me that you'd like to ask? Feel free, don't worry about it.
No, I think after this discussion, I think the future looks good.
Okay.
Of course, we have some challenges. This is probably true for other regions. The important thing is to do the right thing for, as I said, not for only for the present, but for the future. How we would like to see basically the Europe looking in, I don't know, 10 years or 5 or 10 years. And we should start building on that, gathering all the information we need, um, basically putting together all the advantages that we have, because we have a lot compared to other regions, let's say. So I think we have a lot of things to do and a lot of work to do, of course. So yeah, we should collaborate.
Okay.
I mean, among European countries, of course, and with players, with tech buyers, and everything to build this.
Which in turn does not invalidate that we do partnerships with other partners outside the EU.
Mm-hmm.
But we
Yeah.
we definitely should be not be as exclusively dependent, but moving from exclusively dependent to either autonomous or at least codependent with other regions. It can't be harmful. There's a certainty in that. There's no harm in that to be a little bit more autonomous than we are today. I agree completely. D David, no questions I can see, it appears.
Yeah, no questions.
I would then probably close the session. I don't think there will be any questions still coming, or at least it doesn't appear to be the case. So
Yeah.
I just, first of all, I would like to thank all of you that attended. I hope that this was a valuable investment of your time and that you return for whatever next events ALLPROS will be providing in the near future. I hope this was a valuable investment of your time. And thank you so much for having us for the past hour to enter your offices and living rooms in this webinar. And feel free to reach out. We're available if you have any pending questions. And thank you, David, for your support, and obviously thank you, Alexandra, for your expertise in this
Of
area.
course, thank you
And
for inviting me.
wishing all of you happy holidays, since we're close enough for us to be saying that.
Yeah, thank you. Same to you and for everyone that attended or is looking to this recording.
But first and foremost, thanks again to Luis and Alexandra, and more in general. We'd really appreciate you joining us, guys, and have an amazing day and holidays, everyone.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.